Good afternoon from South Cambridge here in the United Kingdom. Today we're going to take a more in-depth look at the 7.8 kilowatt solar system installation to help give you an idea of what to expect in terms of installation and also performance. I'm currently 2 weeks in, so the system is still in its infancy. Hopefully this can add a little bit of perspective for you on how things are progressing. I can categorically state that I wasn't overly concerned about the aesthetics of the panels on the roof and had a fair idea of what they were going to look like. My wife, on the other hand, yeah. So let me show you how the system looks from top to bottom and to give you an insight as to what you can expect. Starting with the planning behind the installation, the company I went with were Halo Renewables Limited, and they're a family-based company in Peterborough. And the link's in the description if anybody needs that. They then subcontract each stage of the installation out. This helped me in terms of overall costs, so I knew what I was paying up front and the rest of the technicalities was left for them to figure out. The first stage was the survey, checking out things like my power supply into the house, fuse box location, anything that might cause complications further into the installation itself. Also, there was ideas about where the batteries placements would go. Also, as my system was over 4.8 kilowatts, I required permission from the National Grid to ensure that my feedback wasn't too much when it poured back in. This can take up to 6 weeks for them to approve. Next up came the scaffolding in preparation for the roofer to install the panels. This was relatively straightforward, and I'm sure scaffolding folk often work on much bigger projects than a small domestic solar installation. Our roof has nice tiles, apparently, that my wife chose, hence her concern about covering them with solar panels. In terms of the installation of the panels onto the roof, Halo, prior to the installation, got the same tiles in the event that there was any accidental damage during the steel guide bars for the panels. That brings me nicely on to the next stage. On the roof, there are 20 panels in total. They're held on by silver guide rails. I believe you can get these in black also. The wiring is underneath the panels and is brought into the loft at one point. The wires are then neatly channeled to the inverter, which then feeds back to the fuse box. And then where the fuse box is, you then have the meter, etc. The flashes in the middle of the night, and my daughter thinks there's aliens in her room. We do need to cover that up. Possibly a bad design choice whenever we were building our house. However, it's not the end of the world. So that brings me nicely to where I'm stood at the minute, and you can see the inverter behind me with the two batteries beneath, and each battery weighs 100 kilograms. These can be sold in a shaded area, a garage, spare room or loft. It's a large system, but one that I think is relatively aesthetically pleasing. It kind of looks like an Apple device, if I can say that. If you opted for a car charger, in this case I went with a Zappi, they can be installed anywhere, either tethered or untethered. Overall, I'm pleased with the look of the panels. I think in many ways it modernized the house a bit. So we're 2 weeks into running this system. Now it's time to take a pop inside to have a look at the savings we've made so far. Okay, so welcome to the indoors, and I do apologize if any of that was not technical enough. I am a simple individual, dad, husband, cut grass for a living, that type of person. So I don't have the technical ins and outs of that whole solar installation. So here we are inside, and this is the givenergy cloud. This is live as we speak, and you can see what's happening here in terms of power flow. That's the solar generating energy towards the battery, also to our house, but also we're pulling a tiny bit off the grid. Now the reason we're pulling a little bit off the grid is because the battery hasn't fully charged. We've had quite an overcast day today, really, so it's pulling tiny bits off the grid. We can see what it's imported. That's import total there, sorry, where I'm at, but import today is 4.3 kilowatt hours, which is actually very low. So the reason it's doing that is because I have it set on eco mode. I haven't customized the system. You can set when you want your battery to charge or when you don't want it to charge. I've set it on eco, so it does it itself. As I said, it's 2 weeks old, the system, so I think it's still got a bit of adapting and learning to do. So moving on then to the energy graphs. This is the interesting stuff here today, for example, is, I said it has been fairly overcast. There's been a bit of rain. It hasn't been a completely clear day, and that's a good example of how the system's running. So battery charges up during the day here, puts in about normally 40 to 46%, and then uses the battery overnight. And the reason it's doing that is because we have AC on, and the AC does pull not massive amount of energy, but enough to deplete the battery. And then we pull off the grid for a couple of hours in the morning until sunrise. Yeah, so where it gets interesting when you look at the weekly, this gives you a better idea in terms of consumption. So you can see our solar is generating most. The battery obviously is being filled up from the solar, and then the rest is being pulled from the grid. So that 15.9%, which is, well, it's great when we come to costs, and we'll move on to that shortly. But before I do that, I want to just change these date ranges slightly for a week from the 20th to the 27th. I think it might give us a better reflection as to what's going on in terms of usage, etc. Yeah, this is fascinating. So 50.2% home generation, 20% off the grid, and the battery 29%. But the battery is probably pulling a tiny bit off the grid whenever, maybe overnight or something. But our actual grid usage is incredibly low. So what we'll do is we'll move on to costs now. And this is why we got the thing installed in the first place. It's costs. I need to try and save money on electric bills. Electric is just going to keep going up as it is. So today our estimated cost is £1.65. If it was like that every day, that would be glorious, but it's not. So I'll jump back to the week of the 20th to the 27th. That's the same week we did earlier. And let's see what that comes out at. £19 and 60 pence. Now, you got to remember, well, for me, I've got to look at that in terms of what we were paying before. So our current electric bill, based on that projection at this time of year, is going to be about £80 per month. I'm currently paying nearly 300 to stay out of the red. So that's the reality of the system at the minute in terms of costs. Of course, that's going to change when we come up to winter. My goal is to try and get off the grid completely, and that's something I'll look at in 6 months' time and see what we can and can't do. But I think that's quite a telling picture. Some days it's a lot less, and some days it's more. So if I jump onto randomly the 28th, it's only 50p cost there. It's £2.80 the next day. Again, it depends really in terms of sun, rain, cloud. Overcast days, it normally pulls in enough to charge the battery to 40%, 30 or 40%. But it's definitely better whenever there's sun. I mean, I actually look forward to sunny days now. Moving on to this graph, you can see the daily generation. And I find this one really interesting. So generation to home sits at 13.23. That's 51%. Generation to battery, 10.6. That's 41%. And then generation to the grid, 1.8. That's 7%. So that's my outgoing. And unfortunately, at the minute, my current electric supplier is being very, very difficult. I was not going to name drop them, but I'm going to say my current supplier, not by choice, is So Energy. And I cannot get anywhere in terms of creating a feed-in tariff with them, or even them recognizing that I have solar. So I've had a lot of issues with them, a lot of back and forth, and it's currently been raised with Ofgem. So I hope that they can resolve whatever issues they have there and soon. So generation will do that on a weekly basis, so you can see how much we can create over the week. I had a question pop up in the channel a couple of days ago. Somebody asking about they use 20 kilowatt hours per day. Well, that gives you a rough idea in a week what you can generate. So
you know, you can see for yourself, you probably do quite well on that. So I guess in terms of costs, you probably want to go on to used to be the old economy 7s. You need to find a supplier, or I need to find a supplier, or get a supplier. I know there's a couple, and in fact I know that So Energy do it, but they're, well, yeah, I cannot get to the point where I can have a cheaper nighttime tariff. If I could have a cheaper nighttime tariff, I could run off solar during the day and then pull in a bit off the grid overnight when it's slightly cheaper, but unfortunately, that seems like a really hard thing to do. I'm going to do this, which is risky. Last 2 weeks, I said it was a 2-week anniversary of the system. However, you got to remember the first couple of days, it was really poor in terms of offloading. Not poor, but it had to offload all the battery. So we were using quite a bit off the grid anyway until it regulated itself. But let's have a look. Okay. So that's 40 quid in 2 weeks. So I guess that falls in line with our projection earlier on, which is roughly £80 per month. One of the things I have noticed while I've been using this system, for example, I'm looking at it now, I'm currently generating 2 kilowatt hours, and I'm consuming 896. I'm monitoring what I use more. So I don't have a smart meter installed, but I'm monitoring in terms of solar input, output, costs, and I find it really interesting, actually quite healthy, to be actively turning more stuff off. As I said earlier, I do want to come off the grid eventually and not depend on it based on the current climate, etc.
So there you have it. Hopefully that was in some way useful. It gives you a bit of perspective on what to expect from solar systems. I know I've had some questions in the previous video. Your usage really depends on what size of system you need. We're a high usage family. As you can see from the previous graphs, it's an insane amount of energy use that we have. Now it's about to rain and my solar system will still be generating some kind of power, but it's time to go in, I think. So whatever you're doing for the rest of today, have a good one, and I will catch you later.